Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Dharma talk. We're really happy to have with us again today Reverend Kikan Michael Howard. Reverend Howard started practicing at Clouds and Water Zen Center in the late 1990s. Recently, he's been the youth practice leader there for 2 years, including 3 months on Zoom during the pandemic. He's also an independent app developer. Kikan produces the Katagiri Transcripts website and podcast at katagiretranscripts.net. And a few weeks ago, he gave the Sunday talk here at Hokyoji about that transcription project. It was a really fascinating talk, and it's a wonderful project. So if you haven't had a chance, please check out his website. If you're interested in Katagiri Roshi's teachings, there are wonderful treasures there that are being slowly uncovered in the slow work of transcription. That's all that I have written down for your introduction, Kikan. Thank you so much for being with us, everyone, and thank you, Kikan. And I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? All right. Good morning. Nice to see all of you. Thanks for choosing this Dharma talk option this morning. I know Dokai is giving the talk at Clouds and Water this morning, so you really have a choice of Hokyoji material. But hopefully this will be fun. So yeah, I'm Kikan Michael Howard. I think I know pretty much everyone here, and the introduction was sufficient, so I won't go into all of that. So yes, a month ago I gave a talk talking about, oops, let's see if my slides are going to work this time, the Katagiri Transcripts website and the project, which is at katagiretranscripts.net. And very briefly, this is transcripts of Katagiri Roshi's talks from about 1979 to 1989. And there's also a podcast where I read the transcripts into a microphone, recording them. And the idea here, basically, very simply, is that Katagiri Roshi was absolutely brilliant, but being not a native English speaker and having a Japanese accent, and the recordings, frankly, are hit or miss, he's pretty difficult to understand, both in the sense of being able to understand what words he's using and being able to understand what those words, what he's intending by those words. So the idea is that some help with the first of those issues may help with the second. And what I'm going to do today is, this is a talk as a bit of an experiment, because previous talks I've talked generally about the project. And one thing I really enjoy doing for talks is just reading a little bit of a transcript, just going through it in order and then opening it up for feedback. It's a great group activity. Problem is that takes a lot of time, far more than half an hour. So what I'm going to try to do today with you is I've picked out a particular topic from, let's see, this is from Fukan Zazengi, Dogen's Universal Recommendation for Zazen, talks 1 and 2 from, I think, 1979, if I remember correctly. One of the earlier talks that's in the recordings. And talk about a specific topic from that. Now, that said, I ended up with like 47 slides to cover in now less than half an hour. So we're probably just going to have to see what we can do with this, and let's see how far we get. But one reason why this is interesting to me is, well, here's the topic. It's Katagiri Roshi's 6 component factors. He talks about them in life, but it's in the context of a talk about Zazen. So he's also talking about Zazen quite a bit. So here are the 5 category or components that he talks about. Circumstances, by which he basically means environment. The sensory system, movement system, what he charmingly calls the gut system, brain and nervous system, and then the final one is total personality. And he actually starts with number 6. Now here's the problem with, it's not a problem, it's really a blessing. The problem for me with these talks is that there's so much material. It's really difficult to know where to start. So, and what's most interesting to talk about. So we'll just see what we can do with this one. So one reason why I chose this one is, or why I'm doing the transcripts project in general, is that in Zen, in Buddhism today, there are a lot of options. There's almost, dare I say, a mishmash of many different traditions and different ideas, both from Buddhism and from the more mainstream culture, and also from New Age thinking, and just a whole lot of things. So for me, it's pretty interesting. I mean, that's fine, actually. I think that's great. In the Buddhist time, it was actually a lot like that, I understand. But I've started to suspect that, at least for me, some of the things that I've absorbed over the last 20 years or so perhaps have not been optimally helpful. And one of the reasons I'm getting into the Katagiri transcript site is because if I'm going to break the rules, not that there is such a thing, but if I'm going to break the rules or follow the rules, it would be helpful to know what the rules actually are and depart from that point. Not that these are rules. This is what Katagiri Roshi taught, though, which may be particularly interesting in our lineage, in our tradition. And so let me give you an example. One thing that I picked up over years is that there's kind of 2 different things. There's following the breath, and there's shikantaza. And I kind of absorbed the notion that following the breath was an introductory practice, and shikantaza was kind of a mystical, I don't even know what, dare I even approach it, kind of practice that I might get to someday. And another thing that I absorbed, whether from American Buddhism or from the culture at large, is that shikantaza and meditation in general is really kind of a mental game. And it's pretty easy to, I think, whether we realize it or not, to get that impression in this culture. And I think maybe that's been an issue going back in Buddhism almost from the beginning. So I wouldn't blame just Western culture, although it's certainly tempting and fun to do so. So the interesting thing is, when I come to Katagiri Roshi's talks, he seems to have a very different point of view, at least in these early talks, from either of those things. So I'm hoping we'll see that as we go along here. What he is getting at is, what did I write down for this? Okay, so 2 things. I think this may be helpful for remembering different aspects of Zazen from Fukan Zazengi, because that's what he gets into. And it might be helpful for understanding what Zazen is and what it is not, according to Katagiri Roshi. And let's see, what was I going to talk about? Oh yeah. I wanted to say that overall, I think Katagiri Roshi's outline here is pointing toward a fully embodied practice, which is in interrelation with the environment. That's kind of the basic point here, and you can look for that as we go along and see if you agree with me or not. Anyway, I really appreciated that, and it kind of helped me reset, to a certain extent, my own practice, or, you know, send me in the right direction, maybe. So let's get into this. He actually starts with point 6, which is total personality. So I'm just going to start reading a little bit of this. Total personality is the exact center of your living, the core of your living. Without total personality, you cannot get circumstances or sensory world or movement system, nothing. In other words, without any of the, without total personality, you don't get any of the other 5 points. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments as we go along, feel free to raise your hand. I can see you, so I can call on you and we can talk about it. So he often uses himself as an example. So he says, there is Katagiri, that's him. That core of Katagiri is really supported by total personality. Total personality is the character created by Katagiri in the past, in the present, in the future. So my parents, my grandparents, my ancestors, that is total personality. I think what he was trying to say here is that is also total personality. That would be the past part. My personality is something I can create after my birth. So that is kind of like character. If you say personality, psychologically speaking, this is a little bit broad. So my personality is something I can create after my birth, but there is another personality I can create. I have carried that personality from before my birth. This is maybe my parents, and also maybe what I have carried from my parents and from my grandparents, from my great-grandparents and ancestors. So that is total personality, the whole personality. One interesting thing for me here is that he says, so my personality is also something I can create after my birth, but there is another personality I can create. He's talking about creating your personality from the past. That's really interesting, and I don't think it's necessarily a mistake. So I see myself, here is Katagiri. Immediately there is a certain kind of sense, a smell. A part of this smell consists of something that I debated whether to include this or not, but I find this image kind of like a little bit provocative. So I'm hoping this will have like an impact here. It's very kind of summons an image or a smell, doesn't it? So if I see myself, here is Katagiri, immediately there is a certain kind of a sense, a smell. A part of this smell consists of something I have created after my birth. The other aspect of my smell is something I have carried before my birth, from my parents, grandparents, and so on. Maybe from before the world began. So at that point, that personality is really a smell. If you see somebody, there is a smell. Katagiri smells. He actually says it kind of like that. Folks, this is the kind of stuff you don't get from the books. Just saying. But Katagiri's smell is kind of a result that we have judged. From where does that smell come? If you research again and again, finally there is no evaluation because you don't know from where it comes. You have to go back to the beginningless past. You have to go back. And you have to go to the endless future. Then you can understand. So finally, that smell is no evaluation, something not evaluated. That is called Buddha, or the original nature of existence. But psychologically speaking, that is called total personality. Total personality, or maybe transpersonality, whatever you say. This is a little bit interesting. I think he may be referring to transpersonal psychology here, which is kind of a Western thing. This seems to come up in a lot of his talks, is he's actually integrating ideas from our, from that is to say, Western thinking with Buddhist thinking. And the fact that he's doing that in English is, I think, one of the most valuable things about these talks, coming from someone of his experience and I don't know what to call it, his realization. So that is the original nature of existence. That is the core of your daily living. You are already under this core, under this huge tree. It's a vast, huge tree because it's tuned into the past and the future. Your personality. You have to believe this. Well, believe it or not, your life is really there, really there. So that is what is called Buddha nature. That's total personality. So he goes on a little bit further. So another word is alaya vijnana, which gets a little deeper into Buddhist psychology. Or sometimes primitive Buddhism says that this is called karma. Okay, here, okay, I know I need to kind of like move things along, but this is so interesting to me. And this comes up in other talks as well. Karma is completely beyond good or bad, right and wrong. But simultaneously, karma is something which is very powerful to carry your life in the samsaric world. But on the other hand, if you want to know karma, you have to go back to the beginningless past and to the endless future. Finally, what is karma? There is no answer, but karma is with you. How do you know? In your daily living, you can know. Now, there's a little hint of something that comes up later, which is one of the most helpful for me things that I have found in these talks, particularly during the pandemic period and with a lot of my own stuff that's been coming up, which is that karma is beyond good or bad or even neutral, he says. He says this in a different way in another talk where it really got through to me, that basically karma is just karma. We can move toward the future. And if we're not really what happens depends on the seeds we plant now. I'm probably badly paraphrasing this, but if that karma is in the past is if we're just leaving that alone, it just sits there. It can't actually hurt us. I know that may be a little bit of a controversial statement, but the way he says it is really nice. It gave me a really positive sense of, okay, I can move forward with my life and I don't need to dwell obsessively on things that happened in the past that normally I would kind of be stuck in. Probably didn't say that well, sorry, but it's a really interesting point, I think. From this point, we can create our own everyday life. On the other hand, I'm going to skip over this a little bit, but we can create our everyday life. We should be there. And finally, we should accept this, and we must be present there, constantly on the big tree. Psychologically speaking, that is called total personality. So that's a little hint of what he means by Zazen. I'm going to skip ahead to circumstances so we get through these. Circumstances. In order to realize this core of human life, first of all, we have to make arrangement of circumstances. That's why Dogen Zenji said in Fukan Zazengi, cast aside all involvements, cease all affairs. This is arrangement of circumstances. See, this is, I think, a really cool thing he's doing. He's breaking down the various points in Fukan Zazengi, which most of us probably know about and have studied for many years, into these categories. And as far as I know, these categories, I think it's something that Katagiri Roshi came up with himself. At least that's the sense that I get. If you meddle with all involvements or all affairs right in the middle of Zazen, you cannot experience calmness. You cannot stand up straight. You cannot sit quietly right in the middle of Zazen because there are too many things you are involved in. So first of all, you have to make arrangement of circumstances. Instead of expressing hatred of circumstances or destroying circumstances, just to make arrangement. Okay, this is something that's very helpful for me personally. Don't have to express hatred of circumstances or try to or desire to destroy circumstances. We can just make arrangement. I incorporated, I probably don't have time to get into all of it, but there were some additional points from talk 2 that were kind of nice as to kind of go over it again, or sometimes there's some additional points. For circumstances, all we have to do first, we have to throw away all involvements and cease all affairs. At that time, we cut them off. Completely, we are free from circumstances. It doesn't mean we destroy, etc. Usually, we are tossed away by circumstances. Here's a new point. That's why Dogen says that in Zazen, we have to be first free from circumstances. Oh, that's actually kind of the same. All right, let's move on to sensory system. The sensory system is to get some information or give some information to somebody and to learn information from the outside. Through the sensory system, which is called eyes, nose, ears, you may have heard of these things, So the sense of seeing, sense of hearing, sense of tangibility, etc. That is the sensory world. It calls it the sensory world and also the sensory system. We have a sensory system, but again, it's not necessary to destroy it or to keep away the human world because we have it already. It's already there. So instead of maligning or throwing away the sensory system or destroying the sensory system, first of all, we should accept the sensory system. And the important point is how to use the sensory system. This is already different, frankly, from things that I might have picked up in some along the way sources. That's why Dogen Zenji says a quiet room is suitable, or do not allow drafts of air to enter, or rain and frost to intrude. That's actually from Zazen, which is a different chapter in Shobogenzo. Or the place of sitting should be lighted and kept from becoming dark at any time, day or night. Eyes should be open not too widely nor too narrowly. This is how to make arrangement of the sensory world. You got that so far? Okay. Let's see here. Oops. So I think I went too far. There we go. Movement system. Movement system is through the body and the mind. By getting lots of information inside. Oh, did I already read this? No. By getting lots of information inside, immediately you can do something. Your whole body and mind creates a certain energy to compel you to act. That is the movement system. You have this. That is the complete unity of the sensory system and also the nerve system and brain system. Lots of things. Then immediately you can create a certain movement. These 6 points, very much like the Eightfold Path and similar lists, are all closely interconnected, and I figured out just last night, actually kind of a circle. We'll talk about that at the end. The movement system comes from the unity of your physical and mental organs. Your body and mind work, and then simultaneously movement comes up. Again, you cannot destroy your movement. Sometimes movement comes from instinct, sometimes it comes from the sensory world, sometimes it comes from a higher level of spirit. Sometimes we don't know, karma, but anyway, there is always movement. So we have to make arrangement of movement. This is very simple movement, and he talks about the Zazen posture here. Anyway, he says this is movement simplified by our arrangement. One more interesting point about movement that he gets into and talk to, even though you sit quietly, your body is always shaking and moving, kind of like mine is, because there is a certain gap between Zazen and you. That is what is called suki in Japanese, seam. Pretty sure he's saying seam. A seam is a crack or pivot, words that I'm not sure about are in brackets. A crack between the two objects. At that time, immediately you can see mental or psychological agitation. Mental or psychological agitation immediately becomes the physical wave. That's why if you all sit quietly, you don't see it, but you move always. So sit in the proper way, immobile. Immobile means just sit. I need to skip over some of this. So the body shows something that closely reflects your state of mind. So if you do Zazen, immediately this is a more complex point that unfortunately I need to skip over because we're already short on time, but he kind of explains why we do Zazen physically first, which is very cool, but this part is so difficult for me to understand. I think I'm going to just skip this one and refer you to the talk. Or maybe I can make the slides available, or you can pause it on this part if the recording is available. And then the gut system. He says, we have lots of guts, the world of the guts. He says it just like that. For this, Dogen Zenji says, eat and drink moderately, and also breathe gently through your nose. The point he's making here, let's see, your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your intestines, hormone system are completely beyond your control. I think that might be slightly overstated, but I'm not going to debate the point here. But there is one thing you can control, and that is the breath. And the breath really influences the whole system. All the systems of the hormones and the lungs and the heart, everything. So that's why we try to concentrate on the breath, taking care of the breath. At that time, all your guts work very naturally. The circulation of your breath is pretty good, pulse is pretty good, and your heart is beating normally, very naturally. Very naturally is a phrase he uses a lot that I've heard some people actually have kind of a reaction to. And I think he's using that almost in the sense of as a logical consequence, almost in that sense. So it's not like this is always like easy. But I don't think he means it. Well, maybe he does mean it in that way. I'm not sure. You can decide for yourself. But very naturally, I hear that more as following along very naturally. Okay, let's see, how much do I have time for? Almost nothing. And he talks about what controlling the breath means. It's not so much control. And again, this relates to attention. So you have to completely concentrate on taking care of your breath, becoming one with breath. And then simultaneously, by the regulation of the breath, you are closely related with total personality, very naturally, because physically this goes very well. That's why if you concentrate, which is called practicing samadhi, one-pointedness, through the regulation of the body, through the regulation of the breath, you can experience very naturally calmness, tranquility. And then you experience enlightenment, the highest spirit of life. Super interesting point here, which I don't have time for. This is in the Hinayana or Mahayana Buddhism, everybody. All the kinds of Buddhism, Hinayana and Mahayana, emphasize this kind of Zazen. I find that a very interesting point for reasons that I can't go into right now. I very much wonder if that's true, but it's kind of nice to think about. And then finally, the brain and nervous system. About the brain nerve system, Dogen Zenji says, do not think good or bad. Do not administer pros or cons. This is where it starts getting especially interesting. He's using a particular translation here that you may well be remembering a different version. Or cease all the movements of the conscious mind, the gauging of all thoughts and views. Have no design on becoming a Buddha. That is the brain nerve system. According to the brain nerve system, we have to regulate the mind. Regulate may not mean what we immediately project it to mean, just an FYI. Mind is characterized by attachment, attaching to one of two extreme ideas. This is characteristic of mind. This is something that Roshi talks about all the time. So we have to make arrangement of the function of the mind. Completely throw away any germination of wishes, thoughts, or views. That's interesting. Just view yourself, this is the part that I actually like. Just view yourself spin with Zazen. I'm not totally sure about the word view. I think that's what he's saying. That's all you have to do. Interesting. So Dogen says, do not think good or bad, right or wrong, because we have to regulate the mind, attachment to two extreme ideas. That is the practice of egolessness. This is where he introduces egolessness. But how can you practice egolessness? Dogen Zen master says, if you really simply forget your body and mind, you should throw away yourself into the heart of Buddha. That means you should throw yourself away to something. That something is to your object. But this object is not merely an object. This object is the house of Buddha. So this is, what can I say about this? You may notice that he's getting into pretty reverential, would you say, language here. And this is something that comes up quite a bit with Katagiri Roshi's talks. And for some people, including myself at first, it may sound a little bit surprising. But I'd encourage keeping an open mind about what this actually means to him. He doesn't mean it in a sense of religious dogmatism when he gets into talking about things like salvation, for example. I'm fairly sure of that. Talks about throwing a book as an example of throwing yourself into the house of Buddha. Your experience of a book can be the house of Buddha. So you can, if you throw yourself away, you can deal with this book with compassion. It's really compassion. At that time, the book really teaches you something. So taking care of Zazen with egolessness, at that time, the practice of egolessness is to throw away yourself into Zazen, be perfectly in the flow of Zazen, offer your body and mind to Zazen completely. At that time, there is no self, no self. But if you completely offer yourself to Zazen, that Zazen helps you simultaneously. That's egolessness. So you have to arrange circumstances, throw away everything, then you can really focus on just one object. And that's what is called samadhi. And then samadhi is what helps with egolessness. How do you practice egolessness, he says later, through the help of samadhi. So it's a very simple practice. And then after you offer yourself, and then after that, if there is no design on becoming a Buddha or expecting a reward, etc., at that time, this practice is exactly to manifest the original nature of the Buddha existence. Review of the 3 important points: samadhi, egolessness, and no design of becoming a Buddha. There's so much more that could be gotten into, but I'm going to see if I can wrap it up here. This is a really interesting point that maybe for another time. Attachment. Something he talks about a lot. Zazen seen as a means. He talks about this very, very often. And it's something that I struggled with for a long time. And now I'm like, okay, I think I'm starting to maybe get where he's coming from. Really wanted to use Zazen as a means myself. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to understand where he's coming from. It's meant to be a helpful point, I think, an essential point, but there's a risk of taking it too far sometimes, in my opinion. Nice to see you, Roger. Yeah, so maybe that's enough. Shikan Taza. Taza is just a hit right in the middle of the head of Zazen. Completely beyond whether you can know or can't know. It's completely beyond. You have to hit it. That is just the practice. Taza is just do it. Actually, you have to do it right now, right here. Shikan is egolessness or samadhi. If you have some ego sense, you cannot practice samadhi because ego sense creates a certain gap or crack, a mental crack or slip. Through the crack, cold air blows, another thing he says quite a bit. So that is not real samadhi, unintelligible. We have to practice samadhi in Zazen. So that is Shikantaza. And with that, I will open it up to your comments. Thank you very much. Tim, can you unmute yourself?
I have that skill. When he was, there's several of the frames where he was talking about to set aside things, but not to throw away or destroy or whatever. And the one about, forget, I think it was movement or the body. I forget what the titles were, but anyways, it just reminded me back when I was at college and just kind of a couple years into Zen. There was a Buddhist professor I had tea with once. I wasn't taking his class. I was sitting in on a few classes. A friend of mine was taking this class. You can audit for free as long as you don't use it. But anyways, we had tea, and he didn't teach Zen. He thought Zen was too hard for the average person. He'd read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, but anyways, he had said he had tried Zazen. It had been so difficult. But then what he tried to try and make it easier was doing Zazen in a sensory deprivation tank. And he said his mind just raced and he didn't understand why. And I wasn't too much into telling a professor that was like a really bad idea, but I kind of said it somehow. I was a new student, but I knew enough that that just didn't sound right. So I would say that was probably an example of trying to destroy or be hostile toward, you know, what you might experience in Zazen, rather than more mellow with it. But and maybe I'm not phrasing it right. But anyways, don't do Zazen in a sensory deprivation tank. That was,
You know, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I've only gone through a small number of the talks at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if someday I came across a talk where Katagiri Roshi talked about sensory deprivation tanks, because I've already come across a talk in this series of Fukan Zazengi talks where he talks about a guy who's hooked up to, you know, like one of those machines that measures your brain waves. And as you were saying that, Tim, I was just reflecting on, he talks about a lot of things that directly relate to what you're bringing up. Even in this series of 7 talks on Fukan Zazengi, which was in a 7-day session. I've already forgotten what they were because my brain is like a sieve or something, but he talks about a lot of specific details like this and interesting stories and stuff like that. So, and that's a fun example. Thank you. I think, yeah, there's a lot of ways to approach it.
One other just fun example, as long as we're on the same type of thing. There was a one-day retreat at the Iowa City Zen Center, and at like 7 o'clock in the morning, these workers started work next door and put KRNA, which is a rock station, and put it on pretty loud. So this quiet room is suitable. This really wasn't happening. But we did what we called KRNA Zazen for quite a few hours, just kind of dealing with it. But at a certain point, the middle path, there was someone who actually went down, told them the truth and lied at the same time, because we were renting a church, room in a church, and someone went down and said, just want to say, I don't mind you guys working here, but just want to let you know we're dealing with some life and death issues here in the church. Why don't you turn the radio down a little? And so they turned it way down, probably thinking someone had died, but really dealing with life and death in a different way. But, so it was nice to practice with KRNA for a few hours. It was also nice to turn it off, and really the music wasn't near as bad as the commercials. The commercials were horrific, trying to do Zazen with save big money at Menards. That was unique experience. Do it once, just once. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, back at Clouds and Water in the days when it was on Prince Street, a lot of you have been there, but it's like it got noisier and noisier, and there was the Black Dog next door, so you'd have like live jazz improv during sessions. It was great, but interesting practice. And then you'd have the people, a lot of you know this, you'd have like the people on the floor above walking on the floor and like flushing the toilet, and you got really used to all the noises. Anybody else have a reflection or something that they'd like to bring up? Jushin.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I had a question. I know a lot of, so like Nishijima Roshi really emphasizes sort of, I don't know if the word is modern or naturalistic, in some cases where Zazen is balancing the autonomic nervous system. Mm. And I know a lot of the younger Japanese priests I've met, some of them are very, they emphasize the Zazen as a somatic practice. And I was just wondering if you saw any of that in Katagiri Roshi's talks. There's also, I know, because I skip it a lot of the time, and I don't mean to, but sometimes you forget, but there's a part in the Fukan Zazengi where you're supposed to sway back and forth, and then a little bit backward and forward, and that is really part of the practice. I know Guogu in the Chinese Chan tradition, coming directly out of Hangzhou, he really emphasizes the start, he emphasizes body scan, like you cannot do this sitting practice if you're not relaxed. You start. Is there any sort of that in categories?
As far as I've seen, and again, I've only gotten to a small number of the talks so far, so I don't really know necessarily, but in this series of talks, no, not so much. To me, he seems much more interested in trying to get across the fundamental point of what Zazen is, and so that people can have an experience of that. Going through these talks, I really appreciate how hard he is obviously working to deliver these talks, and it's difficult, I think, because of there's still some language barrier. But if you actually spend the time and like listen to these talks enough times to actually start understanding them, the talk that he has in his mind is amazing. It's just that it comes out with, the words, word 3 maybe at word 1 position and word 2 maybe at word 4 position. Clean that up a little bit and it's fantastic. So as far as the details, I suspected that would be something that people got more just through sitting with him. And I see Myo nodding, so that's a hopeful sign that that's along the right lines there. That would be my suspicion. Yeah, I suspect perhaps he might not get too hung up on, I don't know, would he get hung up on technical details? I don't know. But your earlier point is, actually your earlier point about the somatic practices, that's closely related. Actually, that's one of the things I'm most interested in determining from this project. Because I don't call it somatic practice, but I'm getting into different practices now, and I'm trying to understand how those relate to Katagiri's actual teachings when he brought Soto Zen here to Minnesota and to the United States. For example, a primary interest of mine is understanding the role of emotions in Buddhist psychology and in Buddhist practice. And I was just listening to a talk last night. Maybe I'll tell you a brief version of this little story. This is from like Blue Cliff record case 25 or something like that, which is what we were studying in group. He tells this story of, there's a very well-known, I don't know his name, but I can probably find out from research later, famous Zen monk or priest in Japan, a man who started out, he went through college, became a college professor, became dean of the college, became president of the university, and then eventually he ended up as abbot of Egolessness monastery. This is why I think this is an actual person who we could probably find out who it was. So he did all this amazing stuff in his life. He was clearly kind of a power person. And at some point, after he became abbot of Egolessness, he became paralyzed, according to Katagiri Roshi's story. And at some point, someone asked him, this is a very crude paraphrase of the story based on very early transcription, rough draft here. Someone asked him how he was doing with that, how he felt about that. And he said something along the lines of, well, this is my karma. And the interesting thing is that might sound like a good Buddhist response, but Katagiri Roshi in this talk actually kind of criticized him, and apparently criticized him at the time and in person for that. And what Katagiri Roshi says, if it were me, I think I would scream. If it were me, I think I would want to scream. And that gave me chills. Because I gather the point there is that he maybe perhaps is asking, is that what you really feel? Where are, in my terms, like where are emotions actually coming into your life at that point? What's really going on in this dynamic life? Not just what Buddhism tells you you should be thinking or feeling, because frankly, I think there's some of that, and that's what I'm working with. But what's really going on? And what do we really need to do about it? So that's a big question of mine, which is why big reason why I'm doing that practice. And to me, that relates to somatic practice and actually feeling things in the body. So thank you for that question. I see Myo has her hand up. Hi, Myo. Myo san.
Hi. There's a story that I think Henry and Jan might know. There's a story that when Suzuki Roshi was dying and his heirs were all sitting in his room, and maybe you know this story too, Kikan.
Please tell it though.
Okay. And everyone was like doing the, is this karma, thing. And Katagiri Roshi just started weeping, and he literally like crawled over to Suzuki Roshi, weeping.
Yeah.
So I don't have a therefore blah blah thing, but like the fullness of human life is included. The fullness of human life is included. Otherwise, I can just hear him say, "You completely missed the boat," or something. Yeah. And then the other thing is, Zen kind of came out of this Vipassana, or they say Hinayana, but I'm not going to say that, which is very, very detailed study of how impulse is created, how the body is so-called created, how it comes out of that, and it emphasizes the enso. Just Roshi used to say, just jump into the big ocean, like over and over. I was like, what? I didn't understand. But even though just jump into the big ocean, there's all these components. So it's like this dance. It's like, if you want to play music, you still have to learn so many things, but that's not music. All those things aren't music. And yet you need all of them for music to arise. So that since that's my jam, performance stuff, that's kind of how I see it. And I found studying the Abhidharma in practice, not just intellectually, incredibly helpful for like how is the sensory system created, etc. So just saying, I don't know if that's helpful. But.
That's spectacularly helpful. Thank you, Myo. I think that's beautifully put. And one of the things that I appreciate absolutely the most about Katagiri Roshi is that he does both. He does the enso, as you put it. And also, this is what really surprised me. One of the many things that really surprised me about these talks, he talks about Buddhist psychology a lot, like in almost every talk. And that's why I got into listening to his talks to check certain aspects of Buddhist psychology. But I was surprised how much he talked about it. He's really into that, as well as sweeping Zen. So both are very important. You said that better than I can at this point. So I think we're out of time, so I might need to defer to the host, but it looks like there are a couple people who would still like to say something.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call on Rushin next.
I just remember a story that Katagiri Roshi told that I remember, that Myo and Henry probably remember, that Katagiri Roshi, and showing the fullness, as Myo said, the fullness of life. I got the impression that Katagiri Roshi didn't like to fly all that much. So when he would have to fly somewhere, he would come back and talk about it. And he would talk about the possibility of a plane going down. And he would say, there's two kinds of people when if the plane's going down, there's the people who would be quiet and be frozen, and then there would be the people that would scream. And he said he would be one of the people that would scream. And I was so disappointed when I heard that, because I thought, well, what kind of Zen master is this that would be screaming? But now it makes so much more sense to me. So
yeah, Me too. So just FYI, there are already stories like that in the Katagiri Roshi Dharma talks that I've transcribed, I think even in the Fukan Zazengi series. So anyone who's interested can go to this site. It's katagiritranscripts.net, and you can listen to his original audio and like follow along with the transcript, so you have a better chance of understanding what he's saying, assuming I've gotten it right. Okay. Was there anybody else with one last thing? Jushin.
Yeah, I just sort of had a follow-up, I guess, to what Mio said or was talking about, what you were talking about in terms of, the funny thing is even reading the Pali Canon and Mahayana and then later Zen, I didn't really ever find the idea that you're supposed to be emotionless. There's I think even in the 10 or 12 full go or independent origination, like emotion is not, I mean, people think there's emotion, but it's actually, it's attachment and craving further down the line. It's like, you know, crying without getting carried away by tears, laughing without getting carried away by laughing, that sort of thing. It's, you should respond, you know, it's like there's, what's the one? It's summarizing all the Dharma is an appropriate response. And so maybe screaming as the plane crashes is an appropriate response.
Yeah, this is a gateway, I think, to a much longer, larger conversation that will probably be taking place, I hope, over like multiple decades.
But the real question is actually back to the way you opened, which was to say, is our idea of an emotionalist Buddhism part of popular culture and not the actual teachings?
Emotionalist is a word that I wouldn't use myself. That is, to me, that's pre-biasing the discussion a little bit because of the way the word is, emotion is used in our society. It's like people say, oh, you're so emotional, like that's a bad thing. To me, emotions are just information. And I'm doing like a lot of work in studying this. Emotions are part of the reality that's coming up. You can put it like there's a fairly standard categorization, which Carla McLaren gets into, which is very simple, but helps a lot, which is you have the, let's call it the intellect, the emotion, the spirit, and the body. Okay, these are kind of strange artificial categories in some way, but I think that's a helpful way of looking at things. And in this society, we are like way, in some ways, weirdly, way intellectual, and the emotions in some ways are like not, their proper role is not understood, in my humble opinion. But this is, again, this is like, this is something that I think I'm going to be trying to research and talk about for probably a long time now, because what I'm saying here is different than what the kind of standard presuppositions are in our society, frankly. And a lot of that is from, and I believe, this is something I'm also researching rather intensely, I believe there's a lot of that in many strains of Buddhism, including Theravada, but also in some of the Mahayana. And I think it really isn't just a Western thing. I think, frankly, this probably goes back to Brahmanism, even Indian culture. I'm not totally sure about that. So a lot of it is kind of like built in. So anyway, the long story short is here, personally, I feel like that I have arrived in the correct Zen tradition for what I want to do, which turns out to be nice, which I did not know before I studied these talks. So it's something that I really recommend. Anyway, that's probably.
May I say something?
Who's that? Mary?
Myo-on.
Or...
Myo-on.
Oh, Myo-on. I didn't even see you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wanting to say too that Katagiri Roshi was delightful and had a wonderful sense of humor. And he, you know, even in the midst of a 7-day session sometimes, or other times, he would crack a joke in the middle of a talk, or he just knew how to laugh and how to get other people to laugh as well. And if you look at the back of the You Have to Say Something book, there's a wonderful picture of him in this wholehearted laugh. And I wanted to point that part of his emotional being as well.
Thank you, Myo-on-san.
Thank you.
And just to wrap up, I gotta say that his sense of humor, he probably gets some sense of that from the books, but it comes across even more in the actual talks. So again, a little promotion there for getting into his talks if that's something you would like to do. Okay, is that enough? I think we're probably way past time, so I think that we should probably wrap it up at that point. But thank you very much for a very stimulating encounter here. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here and kind of practice my speaking skills and share what I'm working on and hopefully a little bit of what Katagiri worked on. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Kikan, again for your talk. And thanks everyone for being here today to share our smells with each other. I'm going to be thinking about that all day.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. Just a few announcements. Next Sunday, Hokyoji's guiding teacher, Reverend Dokai Georgeson, will be giving the Dharma talk, and we're happy to have him back. So we hope you can join us then. You can see the schedule for our upcoming Dharma talks on our website, hokyoji.org. And we also have videos, Kikan's talk today. The video recording will be on the website, and recordings of past talks will be on the website. Also, please join us on Facebook. All of the talks and other events at Hokyoji are shared on Facebook, and you can help spread the word about Hokyoji by liking our page and by sharing our content with friends that you have who may be interested in learning about Hokyoji or maybe even coming to visit here. Finally, as always, it's your generosity that sustains Hokyoji and makes everything we do here possible. So if you're moved to do so, please consider making a donation online. There's a link in the chat box for that. And a gift of any amount, anything at all will be a great benefit. So thank you. Always, we're very grateful for your support. To close, we will recite one round of the 4 vows. The text is in the chat if you need it. And then after that, we'll close with the traditional 4 closing bells. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. See you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you. Take care.